Have you ever worked at a terrible, low-paid job and the only thing which got you through every grueling hour was thinking, one day I will write a novel about this and then you'll see? I've had several menial positions in my life, from working in fast food to dressing up as a ghoul in an amusement park's haunted house, but I've never managed to write a successful book about them in order to get that sweet revenge. However, journalist and screenwriter GauZ is living the dream because he was born and grew up in the African country of Côte d'Ivoire before moving to Paris, where he became an undocumented student and a security guard before returning to his native country. His debut novel, Standing Heavy, was first published in French in 2014, and it won a prestigious award at the time, and more recently it's been translated into English, and it has now been shortlisted for the International Booker Prize. The uniquely structured story moves between different decades, describing the experiences of several black men from Côte d'Ivoire who move to Paris and work as security guards. Their observations about the people around them, the consumerist institutions, and the country itself are so satisfyingly cutting and humorous. This novel is a pleasure to read. It also gives an eye-opening view and valuable new perspective on the long-lasting effects of colonialism, capitalism, and shifts in society over several decades. It also clearly shows what should have already been glaringly obvious, that black men are favored in the profession of security because of the stereotypical view that they are strong and intimidating. There are so many contradictions wrapped up in this state of being because the guard is both powerful and powerless. He is visible to those who want to shoplift and are then deterred from stealing after seeing him. However, he's also invisible to many of the shoppers, except as a source of amusement, as well as to the larger society and the institutions who employ him. Therefore, it's pleasing to see the tables turned and get the view of the guard as he's engaged in this tedious and soul-crushing work of standing there all day long watching these frivolous shoppers purchasing expensive things that they don't need and adding to the wealth of organizations who only pay him a pittance. And the maddening effects of this type of work is really vividly described in this story. For instance, it's observed how a security guard can expect to be exposed to 120 musical hours in the space of a 6-hour shift. And have you ever worked at a job where you just have to listen to the same songs over and over and over again? It is maddening, and his only respite is to retreat into his imagination. Many of the guards' observations focus on the habits of shoppers and their cringeworthy behavior. However, they also point to how this consumerism is inexplicably tied to movements between nations and the commodification of culture. It describes how what is known as the African print is the preposterous, gaudy culmination of the infernal cycle of humiliations inflicted upon the Negro peoples since slavery. I feel like many of our material desires and habits go unquestioned, but this narrative highlights how they are tied to these power structures and history in a very real and immediate way. Unsurprisingly, many of the points have a mocking tone to them and express different levels of humor, from the more juvenile to sophisticated social critiques. And some of these observations fall back on semi-sexist and racist stereotypes. This can make for uncomfortable reading at some points, and sometimes I sort of felt like, oh, I don't know how I should feel about this or if I should be laughing. But the author points out in the novel that when we do not understand the other, we invent it, usually with racist cliches. So I feel like these sections and some of the more uncomfortable parts of the book are part of being so thoroughly rooted in this guard's perspective. Yet the quips, which recount the guard's thoughts and reflections as he's engaged in this surveillance, only make up a part of this book. There are other sections which move between different periods of time as a number of men move to Paris and learn to settle there and find work. They capture periods of political and ideological change as these immigrants first find hope of upward social mobility and education, only to have these aspirations dashed. An individual named Joseph observes after 9/11 has occurred that the whole planet has been plunged into the age of paranoia, an era of law and order. The demand for security and also the regulation of security inhibits these men's desire to progress as people are gripped by fear. At first, I didn't see how the different sections of this book could come together, but when I got towards the end of the book, it became extremely moving to see how they linked up to show this wider view of a changing society and also the fates of these different individuals. There's a poignancy to how the guard, whose observations we get in the 2010s, remains faceless and nameless, even though we are so steeped in his innermost thoughts. Overall, I think it's a strikingly original piece of fiction. I really enjoyed reading it. It is very thought-provoking, and it's heartening to see this author achieving even more success with this book. And it'll be really interesting to see if it wins the International Booker Prize later in May. Now, I found it really interesting going to the Booker Prize website, where they have a whole reading guide about this novel with a lot of interesting questions, and they have interviews with both the author and the translators, and there's observations about the book made by the judges of the prize. So I'll put a link to that in the description below if you want to go read more about this book, because there is so much more to discover and think about concerning it. And yeah, I found it really interesting and valuable to read through all of these things after I finished reading this book. But I'd love to know if you have read Standing Heavy and what do you think about it. Please let me know about it in the comments below. Or are you interested in reading it now? Are you reading it as part of the shortlist for the International Booker? I'd be really interested to hear all of your thoughts about it. So thank you for watching. I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.